We can find many curiosities on the streets of Durango, and the cross of Kurutziaga is one of them. This cross was built in the late 15th or early 16th century. The material used is sandstone and is 4.3 meters high. The style of the cross is Gothic and has an octagonal base. This cross was built for two purposes. On the one hand, it was built to paint the scenes of the heretical events in the 15th century in Durango. These events of the old were called the heresy of Durango. Fray Alonso de Mellas tried to form a sect called the Heretics of Durango, and Mella was a Franciscan friar and preacher of the sharing of the goods and women. In the beginning, he had many followers, but the Inquisition banned him when they heard the news of Fray Alonso de Mellas' intentions. Many of his followers were sentenced to be dead and to be burned. On the other hand, the urban space throughout Kurutziaga was restructured. This curiosity of Durango represents the history of forgiveness. The cross grows with the original sin and ends with the person of Christ. The relationship between the preaching of the cross and Fray Alonso reminds us that it was built as a reminder to purge sin, as a symbol of the victory of orthodoxy. Used as a sign, the trunk has a sacred tree and represents the serpent of paradise. On one side is the expulsion of Adam and Eve, and in the other is the temptation of Eve and the sin of Adam. About this are the apostles in circular shape, and then the very decorated Calvary with Jesus, Mary, and various angels. On the cross are the moon and the sun, the latter two of which are not biblical representations, that have been the excuse for much speculations. The cross was localized in the west of Durango, next to the Guipúzcoa Road. It was retired to Ermit, near the original location. This change of location has turned a small temple into a crucifixion museum. The Hermitage was the seat of the Brotherhood of the Cross. It was built as a civil building in the 15th century. In 16th century, it increased to the south. In the 17th century, was built in the Chapel of Solitude, and finally, in the 21st century, became as a museum. The Brotherhood has existed since antiquity. The first document of the Brotherhood dates from 1570, which states that a house was given to it. This house is now the Hermitage of the Cross itself, which became the residence. The cross has had many interesting events throughout the history. During the Civil War in 1937, during the bombing of Durango, it was taken to Bilbao. On June of 1937, his translation was requested. There are two versions of his translation. On the one hand, it was said that the cross was dismounted before the bombing of Durango. On the other hand, it was because the bomb split into three parts. In 1918, he suffered a terrorist attack, and the cross was broken into several pieces. The attack was carried out by the terrorist group Batallón Vasco Español with a bomb, although some parts were not reconstructed. It was possible to reconstruct them through photographs and copies.